Silent Hill, the official novel. Written by Sadamu Yamashita. Translated by Emily, Lady Ducky, Fitch. Chapter 1. Harry Mason walked into the fog. His footsteps were unsteady as he was still feeling the shock of the accident. His jeep had broken through a guardrail and was now lying at the bottom of a ravine. Harry recalled the shadow that had dashed out into the road. Just as he was about to plow through the small, childlike figure, he completely lost control of the wheel, like the vehicle was an iron horse that refused to follow the driver's reins. Tires screeching, the jeep had collided with the guardrail as if it were moving on its own accord. It was hard to remember anything else after that. By the time he had come to his senses, the engine was stalling and the jeep wouldn't budge. "Cheryl!" Harry called out through the vision-obscuring mist. His daughter had disappeared from the car. It was unlikely that she had been thrown out by the impact of the crash, as the passenger door was left wide open. Not only that, but he was positive she'd been wearing her seatbelt properly. He yelled again, but there was no reply. He searched around the area of the wreck, but found nothing. Harry was beginning to panic, his body burning with parental concern for his daughter. He absent-mindedly reached with the back of his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead, only to find that the liquid dripping down his face was blood. It was only a scratch. He wasn't seriously hurt. But what about Cheryl? Where was she? Was she unconscious, bleeding, injured? Maybe she went off to try and find help. Harry knew that Cheryl was a clever child, and he wasn't just thinking that because he was her father. She was clever, resourceful, and seemed to possess a wisdom beyond her 7 years, but she was so incredibly reckless. A fact that only increased Harry's worry. Charles Hatcher, Albert Fish, Jesse Pomeroy. The names of these loathsome people from the past surfaced in his mind and overlapped the image of his daughter. Those were the monsters that lurked in society, hunting down their young victims with their poison fangs. If Cheryl, a little girl lost in an unfamiliar city, were to encounter a person like that. Harry continued through the thick fog, his every thought consumed by the need to find his daughter as soon as possible. "Cheryl!" He called her name again and again as he pushed through the countless water vapors that swirled through the air. The dense mist hung over the world like a sea of clouds that fell from the sky. It blanketed the town of Silent Hill, a small town with less than 20,000 inhabitants. Was this kind of weather unusual for the area? Harry had never heard anything about fog this severe occurring around the lakeside resort town. The entire lake would have had to evaporate to create something like this. What a failure of a vacation this was turning out to be. He should have been leisurely floating across the lake with a fishing rod in his hands by now, or enjoying the Maine wilderness with his daughter. "Hey, Daddy, do you think there'll be ponies there? I want to ride a pony around, just like a cowboy." Since they began their long car ride, Cheryl had hardly been able to contain her excitement. Harry couldn't really blame her. It was her first vacation after all. "Okay, cowgirl, if we can find a petting zoo, you can pick out a nice pony and ride it all day if you want. But just make sure not to get into bar fights. I don't want to have to skip town before high noon." Harry played along with a smile. "I'll lasso up a cow, then you and me can have a barbecue." "Sounds tasty, but I think Dad would rather have a trout from the lake. Do you think you'd like to try and catch a fish?" "Yeah, but I feel bad for the little fishies. Maybe if we catch them, we should let them go." "Oh, so you'll feel sorry for the fish, but not the cow?" "It's different. Cows always look like they're frowning, and they smell really bad. They're not cute at all." Harry couldn't help but laugh at her childlike pickiness. She hated cows, even though her favorite food was beef stew. For the first time, Cheryl's expression darkened, and her excited chattering stopped. Silence quickly descended over the vehicle. Did I hurt her feelings? Harry wondered as he glanced over at her. Should I say I'm sorry? "What's the matter?" "Daddy, are you gonna get in trouble because you're taking me on a trip instead of going to work? I know you're really busy." "Don't worry. Daddy's not gonna get fired just for taking a little time off. I have a freelance career, remember?" "But Daddy, I heard you fighting on the phone with someone from work." "You mean that stupid publishing agent Edward. He keeps trying to make me write about worthless entertainment gossip. He keeps going on about how hot rock star scandals are in right now, and he even told me to cancel the trip I already had planned. So I told him that spending my time with Cheryl is way more important to me than work. I just had to raise my voice a bit to get that through his thick skull, that's all. Okay, Cheryl nodded, but her warm smile didn't return. Harry apologized to her in his heart. He knew he didn't always have the chance to be a good father to his daughter. Ever since his wife Jody died, he'd been left to raise Cheryl by himself. Fortunately, Harry was a writer, so aside from the occasional information collecting, he can work from his home. It was far from easy. Sometimes he was so busy that all he could do for Cheryl was cook her meals, give her baths, and take her to and from school. Even when he could only manage these minimum necessities, he did everything he could to care for his daughter. All his other time was spent working to make a living, so Harry could hardly ever enjoy any time to himself. Cheryl understood this. She knew her dad had to work hard every day, and she knew he was doing it for her because he loved her. She never got to go to an amusement park or to the playground, and even going out for fast food only happened very rarely, but she was always patient and understanding. That's what made Harry decide to take a trip to Silent Hill, the place where Cheryl's always wanted to go, even though she had no idea where it was. Even though he had taken this trip with all the best intentions, Cheryl was now in danger all because of one stupid driving mistake. If she was kidnapped or ended up meeting a gruesome fate, the regret would be too much to bear. Every year, hundreds of boys and girls were sexually assaulted, beaten, chopped to pieces, or murdered, and some are never found at all. Harry's mind was infested with these grim statistics, all from a book detailing bizarre murder cases he had written some time ago. Those crimes had seemed so unimaginable, yet now they could so easily become a part of his reality. Cheryl, where could you be? It took almost no time at all to reach Silent Hill from the site of the accident. Running swiftly along the sidewalk, Harry soon arrived at what appeared to be a residential neighborhood. He was far from the shops and parks that attracted the flocks of tourists, but there still wasn't a single passerby to be seen. Maybe it was just because of the fog that limited his vision. The roads were empty as well. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was in the middle of the day, but the silence made it feel like the dead of night. It was the silence of a ghost town, a place devoid of life. Though the place gave Harry a strange sense of foreboding, his concern for his daughter crushed any doubts or hesitations that he might have had. Finally, he found what he was looking for. He rushed over to a public phone and immediately dialed the number for the police. The receiver beeped as if it was working, but the call never connected. He tried again and again, but the results were the same. Harry resentfully slammed down the receiver. Damn cops, how the hell are they supposed to get anything done around here if they can't get off their lazy asses long enough to take one stupid phone call? Harry yelled as if shouting to the air would magically spur the police into action. Trying to search for Cheryl in an unfamiliar town would be next to impossible on his own. On the other hand, it would be just as difficult to try to track down a police station. Hey, is anybody there? Harry called out, hoping for the faint chance that someone else was out here wandering through the fog as well. He was answered only by the same oppressive silence. However, his eye happened to catch a flicker of blue through the thick, white veil. Was there someone there? Hey, wait! Harry yelled again as he dashed into the fog. Just before he was close enough to make out any features, a small figure turned and fled. Even from behind, it looked familiar. Wasn't Cheryl wearing a blue dress? Cheryl? Cheryl, is that you? The girl said nothing. She only continued to run. Wait, where are you going? Harry gave chase. Strangely enough, even with the advantage of the legs of an adult over the legs of the child, he wasn't able to keep up. Wait, please come back! Could this be a case of mistaken identity? If this girl did happen to be a stranger, it would certainly make him seem more like a predator than a concerned father. Still, Harry ran. Whether it was Cheryl or not, he had to make absolutely sure. And if he did have the wrong girl, maybe she'd at least be willing to give him directions. The girl dissolved into the fog, leaving only a thin, hazy shadow for Harry to follow. The shadow darted left and was sucked into an alley. The alley ended into a solid brick wall, but off to the side there was a metal gate that hung open. Beyond the gate was a narrow passage squeezed between two buildings. He had lost sight of the shadow, but there was no path it could take other than this one. The rusty side gate screeched as he pushed it aside. Harry froze. The area just inside the passage was splattered with blood. What the... In the center of the bloody pool lay a dead animal. Its pathetic body was crushed and broken, as if someone had savagely beaten it with a metal baseball bat. From what he could tell by looking at its remains, Harry guessed it used to be a dog. Who could do something so cruel? He recalled that many pathological criminals had a history of animal abuse. Harry did his best to avert his eyes as he proceeded down the bent passageway. Between the fog overhead and the narrowness of the path, it felt like he was completely cut off from the world. He felt like he would suffocate. The confined space revived memories of his childhood, when Harry had crawled into a storm drain to play, but panicked and became trapped. He only escaped once one of his friends dragged him out by his feet. A short but terrifying experience had given Harry a fear of enclosed spaces that persisted to this day. He would have turned back immediately if it weren't for Cheryl. Family ties were certainly strong enough to drive a person to overcome their fears, but they were also strong enough to drive a person to folly and self-destruction. Again, he found the floor painted with pools of blood. The building walls gradually turned to chain-link fences, which were also red and dripping wet. It was starting to look less like a back alley and more like a crime scene. Where were the police? Shouldn't one of the residents have reported this? Has anyone even noticed? Harry stood frozen. His horrified gaze was fixated on the corridor's dead end. There was a corpse there, beaten, bloody, and tied to the fence with barbed wire, as if it were being crucified. However, this was no dog. It was clearly a human being. Holding his breath to endure the repulsive stench, Harry examined the body more closely. As he had suspected, the corpse had the height and physique of an adult's. A wave of relief washed over him as he realized that this couldn't be Cheryl. But then, where had that little girl gone? This passage was a dead end, so she couldn't have escaped. Harry was positive he hadn't seen any side streets. As Harry turned to retrace his steps, a fierce roar shook his eardrums. It was an unpleasant sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end like the shrieks of two tomcats engaged in a vicious turf war. Whatever made the sound was uncomfortably close. In fact, he could smell pungent, fishy breath coming from just behind him. In that moment, Harry was slammed against the fence and crumpled to the blood-stained ground. The impact hit him harder than the car crash had. Before he'd even time to feel the pain, his consciousness began to fade. In the corner of his darkening vision, he could just barely see a strange, hideous figure lumbering towards him. The last thing to reach Harry was the sounds of gunshots in the distance.